axes, spear points, drawn blades. They hurled them all at him, and the gods laughed as every weapon turned aside. Stones pulled from the earth, hammers, anything they could lay their hands on. All of it deflected harmlessly, and a great cheer went up across the golden fields of Asgard. And Baldur laughed with the ease of a man who had genuinely stopped fearing death. They thought they had outsmarted fate. If you could have stood in that light and watched the most beloved of all the gods laughing while the weapons of the world refused him, you might have believed it. That fate had been outrun. That love, if it was great enough and thorough enough, could protect what it chose to protect. But if you have heard part 1 of this series, then you have stood at a grave mound in the cold country of hell and received everything the vulva had to tell. You know what the mistletoe dart will do before it leaves Hodur's hand. And so the narrator of this story watches those laughing gods in that golden light and feels the full weight of a world celebrating its safety in the last moments before that safety is destroyed. This is where the prophecy stops being a vision. This is where it becomes the world. To understand what is about to be lost, you must first understand Baldur. He was the son of Odin and Frigg, the Bright One, the Radiant One, the god of light and purity and all that is clear and without shadow in the Norse divine world. The prose Edda strains to find adequate language for what he was. So luminous that light seemed to live in his face. So beloved that the gods who quarreled amongst themselves about everything else were unanimous about him. He was the warmth at the center of Asgard, the reason the Golden City felt worth its name. More than any domain or title, what Baldur was to the 9 realms was irreplaceable, that particular quality of presence which, when it goes, leaves the world permanently colder. And then the dreams began. They came not as ordinary nightmares, but with the specific gravity of premonition, a foreknowledge of his own death that would not be dismissed. He brought them to the gods, and the gods heard them and understood immediately what they meant. If Baldur died, something essential would go out of the world. Frigg acted. Odin's wife, whose wisdom ran deep and quiet and did not announce itself, went out into creation, and she asked. She asked every being and every substance to swear that it would not harm her son, fire and water, iron and all metals, stone and earth, wood and every tree, diseases and poisons, birds and beasts and serpents. Everything that could conceivably harm a god gave its word, and Frigg wove those oaths around her son like armor made from the promises of the world itself. Everything almost. The mistletoe was young and soft, clinging to oak branches, too slight, she thought, too small to be worth asking. She did not trouble to take its oath. And so the games began, and the laughter rang across the divine fields, and at the edge of the circle, Loki watched. There is no figure in Norse mythology more difficult to hold clearly. The popular age has given Loki a version of himself, charming, roguish, the misunderstood rebel with hidden nobility, that the mythological Loki would not recognize. But he is not simply evil either, and to flatten him into a villain performing villainy is to miss what makes him genuinely troubling. He was of giant blood, admitted into Asgard in an age before the line between gods and giants had fully hardened. He had saved the Aesir more than once, with a cleverness so quick it bordered on the miraculous. He was bound to Odin by oaths as old as either of their histories in the divine world. He was also constitutionally unable to leave a perfect thing intact, not from simple malice, from something more fundamental and more disturbing, an orientation toward every apparently sealed system that could not stop itself finding the point of entry. The sources do not tell us clearly why Loki wanted Baldur dead. They do not have to. What they show is entirely consistent with what he was. A being for whom the most protected god in creation was not the sight of something safe, but the sight of a lock, and the question, rising unbidden, of what key the Maker had forgotten to account for. He took the form of an old woman and went to Frigg. With an elderly curiosity that seemed perfectly innocent, he asked about the games. Had everything truly sworn? Everything? Frigg said yes, almost. There was one exception. The mistletoe. Too young, too small and soft. She had not troubled to ask it. Loki found the mistletoe. He fashioned it into a dart, the simplest weapon in the world, a sharpened sliver of the one thing in creation that had not sworn. Hodur stood apart from the games. Baldur's blind brother could not see the weapons deflecting, could not aim at what he could not see, could only stand at the edge of his brother's celebration and hold himself apart from a joy he had no way to share. Loki came to him with something that resembled kindness. He placed the dart in Hodur's hand, told him where to aim, guided his arm, and stepped back. Hodur threw. The dart struck Baldur, and Baldur fell. The silence in Asgard was absolute. Not the silence of disbelief, the silence that comes after the worst thing has already happened and the mind has not yet caught up with what the body already knows. One moment he was standing in the light where every weapon in the world would not touch him. Then he was not. The grief that followed was unlike anything else the Norse tradition describes. Not anger first, not outrage, grief, pure and immediate, the cold recognition of a world that has lost the warmth at its center, and not yet understood how completely. Odin's grief was of its own specific and terrible kind. He had stood at a grave mound in the country of Hel and heard the Volva name this exact moment. He had carried the knowledge home, sat on Hlidskjalf, watched the realms with the eye he had paid so dearly for, and known. And it had not helped, not in the slightest. The grief arrived all the same, and with it the particular anguish of a man who saw everything coming and found, when it arrived, that foreknowledge is no protection at all. They prepared Baldur's funeral with everything his stature demanded. His ship was Hringhorni, the greatest vessel ever built, dragged to the shore to serve as a funeral pyre. None of the gods were strong enough to move it into the water. The giantess Aeonkeep was summoned, arriving on a wolf bridled with serpents, launching the ship with a single blow that set the shore itself alight beneath the rollers. Baldur's wife Nanna died of grief at the water's edge, her heart simply breaking, and her body was laid beside his. Odin placed his ring Draupnir on Baldur's arm, the ring that drips 8 equal rings every 9th night, the greatest treasure of Asgard given to the dead. All the peoples of the 9 realms gathered to witness. Before the fire was lit, Hermodr stepped forward, one of Odin's sons, the Swift One, the messenger. He asked to ride to Hel and petition for Baldur's return. There was no certain hope in this. There was simply no other hope at all. Odin gave him Sleipnir, his own 8-legged horse, the one bred between worlds, the only creature that could find the roads the dead travel, and Hermodr rode into the dark. 9 nights, deeper and colder with every step, through realms without names in the language of the living, crossing the river Giol, where a golden bridge is kept by a maiden named Moadguda, who told him that Baldur had already passed that way, and that the road continued north and down. He rode to the gates of Hel itself, set Sleipnir at the fence, and cleared it in a single leap. Baldur was there, seated in the place of honor, bearing himself as he always had, tended and respected. For Hel is not a place of torment, only a place from which the living cannot retrieve the dead. Nanna sat beside him. Both were honored. Both were still dead. Hermodr stood before Hel, Loki's own daughter, half the color of health and half the color of a corpse, with Baldur himself seated in the hall behind her, close enough to see, close enough almost to touch. Not suffering. Honored even here, but unreachable. Hermodr looked at his brother across the threshold between the living and the dead and asked Hel for what could not be given. Hel listened and named her condition. Every being in every realm, living and dead alike, must weep for Baldur. Every single one. If one withheld its grief, he would stay. The messengers went out across all 9 realms, and the world wept. Stones wept, trees wept. Every creature, every living thing gave its grief freely, because Baldur's loss was real and felt and required no persuasion. In a cave, sitting alone, was a giantess named Thirk. When the messengers came to her and asked her to weep, she refused, with a coldness so absolute it seemed to come from somewhere beyond indifference. Baldur had given her nothing in life and would receive nothing from her in death. Let Hel keep what she has. Baldur would not return, and Thirk, the tradition makes clear, was Loki in disguise. He had killed Baldur's body with the dart through Hodur's unwitting hand, and then, wearing another face, he had extinguished the one condition that could have brought him back. This was not accident. This was not chaos for its own sake. This was deliberate and permanent removal, the full scope of intention made visible only in retrospect. And yet, even then, Loki was not finished. His final break with the Aesir came not in hiding but in their own halls. The sea god Aegir held a feast, and Loki came, and what he did there was not trickery but something colder. A systematic and methodical humiliation of every god in attendance, one by one, with every secret and every shame he had collected in an age of watching from the inside. By the end, there was nothing left between him and the gods but the full weight of what he had always been. He had burned the last of it deliberately, the way he had burned the net design in his fire pit, discarding it before he ran. Then he fled. The gods found him. He had transformed into a salmon and hidden in a river beneath a waterfall. But in his own hall, before he ran, he had worked out how to weave a net that could catch a fish in any current, then thrown the design into the fire at the sound of approaching footsteps. The gods found the charred outline of it, understood immediately what it was, and wove their own net from the pattern of his discarded ingenuity. He was caught in the architecture of his own cleverness. Some inevitabilities carry their own dark symmetry. They took him to a cave deep beneath the earth. His son Nafi was killed, and his entrails used as the binding cord. And where they touched the rock, they became iron. 3 great stones, 3 bonds. Loki stretched between them, immovable. Above him, a serpent was fixed to the rock to drip its venom directly onto his face. And Sigyn stayed. Loki's wife, who had done nothing wrong, who had not engineered any death, who had committed no act except choosing to love a being of extraordinary and destructive complexity, remained in that cave with a bowl, catching the venom as it fell. When the bowl filled, she turned to empty it, and in those moments the venom struck Loki's face and he writhed, and the earth above them shook. The Norse tradition knew what caused earthquakes. Not geological forces. A woman's arms growing heavy in the dark. The tradition holds Sigyn's vigil without explanation and without comfort. It does not ask us to approve. It does not ask us to understand. It holds it the way the deepest truths are held, as something true and terrible, and beyond simple judgment. Love expressed not as triumph, but as staying in darkness, doing the one small thing that can be done, with no resolution coming and no end in sight. What does it reveal about the Norse understanding of the world that they placed the death of their most beloved god at the center of their apocalypse myth? The Baldur narrative has drawn serious scholarly attention. Some historians noting its resemblance to certain Christian theological motifs, raising genuine questions about what the narrative may have absorbed from the Christian culture surrounding the men who recorded it. Snorri Sturluson, who compiled the prose Edda in 13th century Iceland, was a Christian chieftain writing within living reach of a tradition that was already fading. And those questions are worth holding. But the theological statement the story makes is distinctly Norse in what it refuses to console. A world in which the most beloved and most completely protected being can be destroyed by the one small thing left unasked. The plant too young to seem worth asking, the brother too blind to see what he was doing, is not a world in which safety is achievable through sufficient precaution. Frigg asked everything. The vulnerability was in what seemed too small to matter. That is the precise quality of the wound the tradition is naming. The thing that unmakes the world is never the thing you guarded against. And Loki's role carries its own theological weight. In many traditions, the force that destroys the world arrives from outside it, an opposing power to be expelled or defeated. In the Norse universe, it was always inside. Loki was in Asgard. He was at the table. The destabilizing intelligence that would drive everything toward Ragnarok was not an enemy that could be excluded, because the divine order had always contained within itself the mind that could find the flaw in any apparently perfect system. You cannot exile chaos from a world that was built from it. And then there is Sigyn, holding the bowl, in the dark. The tradition's closing image for this chapter of the Apocalypse is not the punishment of the guilty, but the endurance of the innocent. The Norse tradition was not sentimental about love. It was precise about it. What it chose to show us at the end of this chapter of the world's unraveling is love stripped of every consolation, expressed as the willingness to stay when staying changes nothing. That choice was not accidental. It is the tradition saying something it could not say any other way. The cave is beneath the earth. Above it, Asgard continues. In Valhalla, the Einherjar train in the long light of preparation, the heroic dead that Odin has been gathering since the Volva spoke at the frozen grave mound, assembled for a war they do not yet know is nearly upon them. The feasting continues. The mead flows. Odin watches from Hlidskjalf with the one eye he has left, and he knows what every warrior dining below him does not, that the light at the center of Asgard is already gone, and that the chains beneath the earth are all that stands between the world they know and the world that ends. In the cave, Sigyn holds the bowl. The serpent waits above. The earth is still for now. And Loki waits, bound, but not permanently. The Volva spoke of this. She spoke of Baldur's death, and it came in sequence exactly as she told it. She spoke of a ship still being built from the nails of the unburied dead on a shore no living eye has ever seen. She spoke of a wolf growing stronger in his ribbon fetter, of a serpent in the cold deep of the ocean beginning to release its own tail. The prophecy does not hurry. It moves on its own time. 3 winters are gathering somewhere beyond the edge of the world. Between them will be no summer. The world above the cave continues, warm and unsuspecting, not yet understanding what has already been set in motion beneath their feet. The Volva spoke this. Odin heard it. Every word arrives in sequence. What comes next? The great winter, the slow dissolution of everything that holds the world together before the fire at the end of everything, belongs to the chapter ahead. This chapter of this legend has been told. Subscribe and return to Aeonkeep. More legends await.